I want to start today with a challenge to that quiet, nagging insecurity I think a lot of us have.
Oh, the one whispering that you just aren't smart enough for the heavy hitters.
Exactly. The voice saying that reading Plato or Dante is a talent reserved exclusively for geniuses.
Or people with 3 PhDs and tweed jackets with elbow patches.
Right. Well, we're here to tell you that voice is a liar. Deep reading isn't a magical talent bestowed at birth. It is a mechanical skill.
Like driving a stick shift.
Or learning to bake a sourdough loaf. And just like driving, anyone can learn the mechanics if they have the manual.
And we have a very good manual to look at today.
We really do. But before we open that manual, I need to share something unique about this specific discussion. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
Which is actually quite fitting because the book we are breaking down is all about the mechanics of how we process information.
We are exploring The Well-Educated Mind, a guide to the classical education you never had by Susan Wise Bauer.
This book has been around for about 20 years. It has developed a bit of a cult following.
But for those unfamiliar with her work, who is Susan Wise Bauer?
Bauer is a historian. She's also an educator who became a central figure in the modern classical education revival movement.
Right, she originally wrote The Well-Trained Mind.
Exactly. That was basically the Bible for homeschoolers teaching parents how to give their kids a classical education. But then she realized something interesting.
The parents were asking for themselves.
Yes. They were coming to her saying, "This is great for my kid, but what about me? I missed all of this."
That is the exact demographic this book targets. It is for the adult who maybe has a degree, maybe even a master's, but feels like they just skimmed the surface.
They never actually read the great book.
Or they did and just completely bluffed their way through.
Right. The author's core thesis is that education is not a credential. It isn't a diploma you hang on the wall to prove you are finished.
Education is a lifelong practice.
A lifelong practice of wrestling with foundational texts. And her most liberating argument is that you don't need a professor to referee that wrestling match. You just need a structure.
And that structure is the engine of the book. It is called the trivium.
Now, normally when people hear the word trivium, they think of medieval monks.
Dusty Latin grammar drills.
Exactly. But Bauer retools this ancient concept into a very practical 3-step process for the adult brain.
It is a cognitive framework. In classical schooling, the trivium follows child development, grammar, logic, rhetoric.
But here the author applies these as 3 distinct stages of reading a single book. It is a way to layer your attention so you don't get completely overwhelmed.
I love this approach. It gives you permission to be imperfect at the start. So let's break these stages down. Stage 1 is the grammar stage. The author calls this the handshake.
Right. This is the gathering data phase. The biggest mistake adults make when they pick up a hard text, say Don Quixote or the Iliad, is that they try to analyze the deep philosophical themes on page 1.
They get bogged down trying to be brilliant critics before they even know what is happening in the plot.
It is like trying to critique a movie's cinematography while you are still trying to figure out who the main character is.
Yeah, that's impossible.
Yeah.
In the grammar stage, the book suggests you lower the bar. You are just answering the basics. Who, what, where, and when.
Who are the characters? What are the key terms? If it is a history book, what is the timeline?
As Bauer outlines, you should literally be writing this down. It is superficial, but it is necessary. You are just shaking the book's hand.
I think that relieves so much pressure. You don't have to be smart yet. You just have to be observant.
And once you have done that, once you know that Sancho Panza is the squire and Quixote is the knight, you move to stage 2, the logic stage.
This is the detective phase. Now that you have the facts, you start looking for connections. You are asking, why is this happening? What is the author actually arguing?
Is there a contradiction here?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this connects back to Mortimer Adler's theories. We've used his lens before.
Right. He distinguishes between information and knowledge.
Yes. The grammar stage gives you information which is just scattered facts. The logic stage turns that into knowledge, a structured grasp of the author's intent.
You are tracing the argument.
For example, in Don Quixote, you stop just watching the windmills and start asking, is Cervantes mocking the idea of chivalry here, or is he mourning it? What evidence exists for either side?
So grammar is what does it say, and logic is it true? Or at least, how does the author try to convince me it is true?
Yes, you are analyzing the validity of the structure itself.
Which brings us to the final stage, the one we all want to jump to immediately. Stage 3, rhetoric.
The jury phase. This
Yeah.
is the pinnacle. This is where you finally get to have an opinion.
But notice the author emphasizes you only get to do this after you have gathered the facts and analyzed the argument.
Now you evaluate. Do you agree? Why? And most importantly, how does this apply to your life?
This is the crucial step that turns reading from a passive activity like binge-watching TV into an active dialogue. You are effectively arguing with the author.
And return to that Adlerian lens. This is the step toward wisdom. Wisdom isn't just knowing what Machiavelli wrote in The Prince.
Right.
Wisdom is understanding the ethical implications of his advice and deciding whether you should apply that to your own career or reject it entirely.
It creates a mind that is, for lack of a better term, athletic. It can handle heavy weights without pulling a muscle.
Athletic thinking. I like that. It was about stamina and form.
I actually want to pause on that idea of athletic thinking for a second. We live in an economy of hot takes, 10-second clips, and headlines designed to bypass your logic and hit your emotions directly.
Absolutely.
In that environment, the ability to slow down and process information through these 3 stages, grammar, logic, rhetoric, is a superpower.
It is the difference between simply reacting to the world and actually understanding it. If you skip the logic stage in your daily life, you are incredibly prone to manipulation.
You accept the grammar, the surface facts, without ever checking if the argument holds water.
Which is exactly why we do these deep analytical discussions. We want to help build that mental muscle.
Speaking of which, at this convenient midpoint, I want to mention our use of mindful moments in our YouTube channel. There are fantastic resources offering AI book analysis designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
It is a great way to keep that mental athlete in training, even when you aren't tackling a massive 500-page book.
Definitely. Okay, let's get back to the manual. We have the method, the trivium, but a method needs material. You cannot just read critically in a vacuum. What does the book actually tell us to read?
This brings us to the second half of the text. The author provides extensive reading lists across 5 major genres: fiction, autobiography, history, drama, and poetry.
But she has a very specific rule that frustrates a lot of readers. You have to read chronologically.
Yeah, I can see why that feels annoying. If I want to understand modern politics, why do I have to start with Herodotus?
Why can't I just jump to the 20th century?
Because, as the author argues, ideas have a genealogy. Bauer insists that to understand the modern novel or modern history, you must see where it came from.
It is an ongoing conversation.
A conversation spanning thousands of years. If you jump in at the end, you miss all the context.
It is like walking into a movie theater for the last 10 minutes of a film. You see the explosion, but you don't know who lit the fuse.
Exactly. Take the novel, for instance. The book suggests starting with Don Quixote because it essentially sets the rules for what a novel is.
Then you move to Pilgrim's Progress?
Or Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah.
You watch the hero's journey evolve over time, so by the time you reach a modern fractured narrative, you understand exactly what rules the author is breaking.
Same with history, I assume.
Even more so. From Herodotus and Thucydides, moving through Machiavelli, then to Locke and Rousseau, all the way to World War II, you literally watch the concepts of government and the individual change over centuries.
If you read Rousseau without understanding the specific monarchs he was reacting against, you don't really get Rousseau.
Right. So we have a powerful method in the trivium and a rigorous chronological map of these foundational texts.
It sounds like a perfect recipe, but we don't just summarize here, we critique. We need to apply the author's own logic stage to her text.
That is only fair. We have to treat the book itself as a text to be analyzed.
We have a framework we like to use called the ethical and civic lens. We test ideas against 2 benchmarks, the Golden Rule and the preamble of the U.S. Constitution.
Basically asking, does this idea help build a just society?
Let's start with the strengths. From a civic responsibility perspective, the method in this book is a powerhouse. It directly promotes domestic tranquility and the general welfare.
How so?
Because it creates skeptical, rational citizens. A citizen trained in the logic stage can look at a political speech, a cable news segment, or a viral post and dismantle it.
They can say, wait, that is a non sequitur? That evidence doesn't support that claim? It immunizes the population against demagoguery?
That is undeniable. A population that reads deeply is much harder to trick. But, and there is a significant but, here, when we apply the Golden Rule test, cracks start to appear in the curriculum.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The Golden Rule is about moral reciprocity. And here is the issue. The book's list is undeniably the Western canon.
It is almost entirely European and American. It is overwhelmingly white. It is heavily male.
And the critique isn't just about diversity for diversity's sake. It is about that reciprocity.
Exactly. If we expect other cultures to respect our wisdom and learn from our texts, but we refuse to engage with theirs, we are violating that ethical rule.
We are implicitly saying my history is universal history, but your history is just local flavor.
It is a massive asymmetry. And looking at the preamble test is that established justice. If your mental map of the world excludes the voices of the marginalized, the colonized, and the oppressed, are you really equipped to understand justice?
You aren't. You are seeing the history of the winners, or at least the history of the people who owned the printing presses.
As the author's own critics might suggest, by underrepresenting those groups, the reading list fails to address structural inequality. You might understand the history of the kings, but you miss the history of the people they ruled.
So we have a tool, the trivium, that is highly democratic and empowering. But the map we are given to use that tool on is incredibly narrow.
Which leads us into a deeper logical analysis of the book itself. If we put on our logic stage hats, we can identify 5 specific logical fallacies or gaps in the argument for this specific list.
Let's run down that list. Number 1 is the appeal to tradition.
Right. There is an underlying assumption in the book that because these texts have stood the test of time, they are inherently the best source of wisdom.
It is old, so it must be good.
But survival often reflects power structures, not just merit. Texts survive because monks chose to copy them or kings funded them. We don't know what masterpieces were lost simply because they didn't fit the narrative of the powerful.
That is a chilling thought.
Wow.
We are reading the survivors, not necessarily the best. Moving to number 2, sampling bias.
The book presents this Western canon as the ultimate foundation for a well-educated mind, but that severely limits the definition of well-educated.
It restricts it to being educated in the Western tradition alone. A Confucian scholar is certainly well-educated, but they might not have read the prince.
Right. It conflates Western with universal, which leads directly to misuse number 3, hasty generalization.
Assuming that the truths found in these specific texts apply to all humans everywhere, when they might actually be specific to a certain cultural or historical mindset.
Exactly. Fallacy number 4 is what we call the book-centric gap.
The framework completely ignores oral traditions or visual learning.
In many indigenous cultures, for example, wisdom is passed down through story, song, or practice, not just written text. By focusing solely on the written word, we miss huge chunks of human knowledge.
And finally, number 5, there is a practical misuse, which I think hits home for a lot of our listeners, the perfectionism trap.
Oh, this is a massive one for busy adults. The list is so ambitious. Start with the Greeks, read all of history chronologically that it can actually backfire.
Instead of feeling free to learn, adults feel intimidated. They think, if I cannot read 3 hours a day like a Victorian scholar, why even bother?
It becomes a source of shame rather than freedom. I am not doing it right, so I won't do it at all.
Which is the exact opposite of the book's intent. The goal is to encourage reading, not to create a new reason to feel inadequate.
So we have torn it apart a bit. We have exposed the bias, the gaps, and the logical fallacies. But I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here.
Because the method itself, the trivium, is still absolute genius.
It is. And this brings us to our synthesis, the verdict. The strength of the book is the trivium method. It empowers the reader's agency. It gives you the tools to think for yourself.
But the weakness is the list. It is too narrow for a globalized world.
So what is the solution? We propose something called Bauer Plus.
I love this concept. Bauer Plus means taking that rigorous method, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and applying it to a global, inclusive canon.
Keep the engine but change the fuel.
Exactly. Read Don Quixote, yes. It is a fantastic text. But also, read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, using that exact same level of scrutiny.
Read The Prince, but also read the Analects of Confucius.
You apply the logic stage to voices that were left out of the original list. You ask, what is this author arguing? What is the evidence here?
And that fulfills the promise of the book better than the book itself does. Because the goal isn't just to win trivia nights, the goal is understanding.
And understanding requires diverse perspective.
It does. It requires us to become people who can think independently and engage with the world ethically. If we only read people who look like us and think like us, we aren't wrestling, we are just hugging.
We aren't wrestling, we are just hugging. I really like that. The trivium is a wrestling move. Use it on everything.
And that brings us back to that Adlerian ladder.
Yep.
Information is knowing a list of texts. Knowledge is knowing what is in them. Understanding is seeing how they connect.
But wisdom is taking that understanding and using it to live a better life and build a better society.
And you cannot build a better society if you are only listening to one part of it.
Precisely. The Bauer Plus approach creates a truly well-educated mind for the modern world, one that respects tradition but isn't trapped by it.
It empowers you to be the judge, to sit in the rhetoric stage and say, I value this from the past, but I disagree with that.
Or, I value this from a different culture, and here is how it challenges my entire worldview.
That is the very definition of critical thinking. It is not about knowing the right answers. It is about knowing how to ask the right questions.
This has been such a fascinating look at how we learn. Let's wrap this up with a quick spoiler-safe summary of why this book matters.
Right. The author presents a compelling argument that reading difficult literature isn't a mystical talent, but a mechanical process anyone can master using the ancient trivium framework.
By breaking reading into grammar, logic, and rhetoric stages, the text transforms readers from passive consumers into active critical thinkers.
While the specific curriculum heavily favors a traditional Western canon, which limits its global perspective, the underlying method remains incredibly empowering.
It provides the tools necessary to dismantle arguments, resist manipulation, and engage thoughtfully with the foundational ideas that shape our world.
The book ultimately matters because it democratizes intellectual rigor, proving that a well-educated mind is accessible to anyone willing to practice the mechanics of deep reading.
And that leads us to our 3 key insights, connecting critical thinking to the heart of this text. Number 1.
Reading is a mechanical skill, not a natural talent. The trivium demystifies complex text by giving you a step-by-step process: gather facts, analyze the argument, then form an opinion.
Number 2. Skipping the logic stage makes you vulnerable. If you jump straight from gathering facts to reacting emotionally, you lose your defense against manipulation and poor reasoning.
And number 3, a truly educated mind requires an inclusive map. While the trivium is a powerful tool, applying it only to a narrow Western canon limits ethical growth and genuine wisdom.
So here's my final thought for you listening. We talked about the grammar stage, the handshake. What is one difficult, intimidating text that you have always wanted to read but felt unqualified for?
What if you just picked it up and shook its hand? Don't try to analyze it yet. Don't try to judge it. Just meet it. See what happens.
That is a brilliant place to start. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. The structure is there to help you.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis.
Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think critically.
And don't forget to check out Mindful Moments and our podcast test for more content like this.
Thanks for joining us. Go read something hard.
We'll see you next time.